9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Freethought in Florida. Freethought in Florida is a production of the atheist community of Polk County. I'm Sarah Ray. I'm one of the directors of the ACPC. This is Friday, January 22nd, 2021. And my co-host tonight is Devin Graham. Devin is the Assistant State Director with the American Atheists for the state of Florida and President of Humanists of Tallahassee. Devin, how are you tonight? Oh, I can't hear you, though. See, that's a problem. I got all the other sound worked out but yours. Okay. How are you, Devin?
Hear me now?
I can hear you now.
I'm doing really great.
I love that you care so much about that.
So worried.
We worked so hard after the last episode and all the audio troubles that that we had.
And then I'll be silenced the whole time.
Oh my God, that's so funny.
Like a conservative blogger or something.
How are you?
I'm doing really great. It's nice to just worry about like the personal crises that we deal with during a pandemic, as opposed to the personal crises that we deal with during a pandemic, plus the global crises that was involved with the Trump campaign or the presidency. So it's a plus.
Right. Today is a little bit better than, say, I don't know, Tuesday.
Oh yeah, I'm not sweating nearly as much.
Right.
So this is good.
Right. And we're going to talk a little bit about the inauguration and some of that stuff too. But like, I want people to understand that as a show, right? This is part of a 501c3 nonprofit, so we're not supposed to be partisan and all of that. Mm-hmm. But also, like, just as we tried to hold accountable the Trump administration and Republican lawmakers, we're going to do the same thing for Democratic lawmakers, right? Like, no matter who's in office, if the bills that we're looking at or the policies or whatever it is are issues that secular people need to be aware of and care about, that doesn't matter what party you're in to me. Like, we're going to hold you accountable the same way. So just putting that out there.
You're the South Park of shows. You just make fun of everyone.
Right.
So.
Right. Exactly. Well, before we move on, I do want to thank our patrons over at patreon.com/polkatheists. Patreon's another great way that you can support the ongoing production of this show. If you can make a monthly pledge of $3 or more, that makes a big difference. And of course, if you can't right now, that's okay too. We would sure appreciate it if you would like and subscribe and share out the episodes with anyone you think might appreciate it, or people that you just are mad at. I don't know. Make some people angry, I guess. I don't know, send it to Uncle Jim or whoever. So our guest tonight is Geoffrey Blackwell, Esquire. Jeff is the Litigation Counsel with American Atheists. So we're going to talk to him about some things that are going on in the litigious world. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you guys for inviting me, and it's Esquire.
Esquire
at the end.
It's fancy like his hair.
Yes.
Wonderful locks. I'm not going to take the
So Jeff joins us today to talk about a couple of lawsuits that were recently filed, both a combination of organizations, but including American Atheists. But before we get into all of that, why don't you just take a minute and sort of talk about you and your role at American Atheists and what all that is and entails?
Sure. Well, I'm litigation counsel. Our office is essentially divided into two parts, though there's plenty of overlap, and we'll get into that when we talk about the lawsuits. I handle the litigation side and what we call constituent services. And my boss, Allison Gill, our vice president of law and policy, handles advocacy, opposing or promoting bills at the state legislatures and things like that. I handle our litigation. So essentially what happens is people from around the country, when they encounter potential violations of the separation between religion and government, can let us know primarily through a form that we make available on our website, atheist.org/report a violation. And we take in those complaints, and I try to determine whether or not it seems a violation may have occurred. If a violation might have occurred, we conduct a factual investigation and then do our best to work with the government agency involved to come to a constructive resolution to the problem. If that isn't possible, then we determine whether or not to pursue litigation against the agency involved. We also do what's called strategic litigation, where we identify areas of law that we want to move in a positive direction and where there's a good opportunity to do so, and pursue those cases actively.
Right. One of the things that you mentioned about people being able to file complaints. Obviously, we've worked together as as the leader of our local organization. We have just sort of how I think through these issues when they come to us. So, American Atheists isn't the only organization that does that sort of work. And our local group is also affiliated with the American Humanist Association, for example, right? And so when things come up here, we often think through, well, the first thing I do is I send a group email to you and Andrew Seidel and Monica Miller, everybody in the group too. You're all on speed dial. But a lot of it is what sort of picture am I trying to paint as the local organization? What do I want this to feel like? And that's different depending on who the complaint is against and what sort of relationship we might have with them. I often say, like with FFRF, a lot of times in places like this, which are, rural red seas between the blue dots, there is a lot of in-group, out-group. There's a lot of, outsiders are a bad thing. And so some group from Madison, Wisconsin coming in trying to tell us how to do what we do often rubs the wrong way. And so, again, if that means if there's a better approach to take, which organization handles it, or if it's we handle it locally, right? If we're going to the school board as residents, as an active organization in the community, going to the school board with the support of our team at American Atheists to help sort of guide us through that process. Like, there's a lot of different ways that you can sort of navigate these things. And I really just to say, like, I appreciate that whole structure exists as someone out in the world that encounters, people call me up and say, hey, the school did this, or, the city council's doing that. I certainly appreciate being able to have that.
And we're happy to provide that. And you're exactly right that different situations call for different responses and, different striking different tones, particularly where, if an organization like yours has a prior relationship with an entity and they have shown themselves to be willing to work with you in the past, then we absolutely don't want to take an approach that feels like we're, coming down from DC to, stomp on them or something like that, because that is very often not constructive. There are circumstances where it could be, but that's not necessarily the case. So yeah, whenever you're doing this kind of work, you absolutely have to be flexible and responsive to the situation on the ground. And I like to think that we do that effectively.
I would say so.
And if we're not, please, by all means, let us know. Constructive feedback is always helpful.
Absolutely.
What kind of numbers do you deal with? Like, how many complaints do you think you get on average?
I recently ran the numbers on this for one of the cases that we're involved in that started on Tuesday. And we get an average of about 140 complaints a year of one form or another. So like 3 a week. But they don't come consistently that way. Sometimes we will go a week without getting any, and then 1 week we get 12 or something. So I do notice they tend to spike around Christmas and graduation time.
Wonder why.
A few other times of year when things spike, particularly in the early part of the year when state legislatures are in session and people are seeing news reports of this, crazy lawmaker decided to introduce a bill about homeopathy, or plastering "In God We Trust" on every brick of the schoolhouse or something like that. People will bring those to our attention, which we appreciate because it gives us an opportunity to line someone up to give testimony to that state legislature, opposing the bill, that kind of thing. So fits and starts.
Good times. And these can be done anonymously, correct?
Absolutely. And depending on the circumstances, and it also depends on the judge you get, but even litigation can be brought anonymously. The most famous instance being Roe versus Wade, where her name was not really Roe. And her name was actually kept secret for quite a long time afterward. But because the circumstances of civil rights litigation, especially when it comes to civil rights litigation that intersects with religion, and you have someone who is probably a member of either a religious minority or the non-religious community, which unfortunately is still a minority in many, if not most places in the country. Those can be circumstances that justify allowing a plaintiff to file under an anonymous name.
We should give a brief shout out to the Roe V Wade anniversary today. So happy 48th.
Yes, 73.
Okay. I can do math. I did it.
Well, and while we're on the topic then, we should probably also mention that on the anniversary, the Florida legislature has filed some new legislation for this 2021 session.
Yeah, for pain-capable infants. So that's the title of the bill. So we've got our work cut out for us this year. It's going to be a good time. So this will be. Keep your eyes on Florida, guys. It's going to get wacky.
Let's take a minute to talk about the inauguration of the Biden Harris administration. I watched. I live. I don't tweet well. I'm a zennial. I left. You laughed knowingly. I left MySpace. I went to Facebook, and that's it. Okay. I have a Twitter. I have an Instagram. I have all those things. I just don't. I'm old. And so I was posting during this during the inauguration. And a lot of it was, wow, there's another hyper-religious thing that really didn't need to be involved in this thing today. And I keep fairly mixed company. I don't have a silo set up really in my social media circles. I've got, I've believer friends and people that we work with and all kinds of stuff. But I got a lot of pushback on for a number of reasons, right? Just be glad that we're here at this point and enjoy it and don't nitpick every little thing, which is interesting because that's sit down and be quiet. It's not your time. Okay, well, I think David said it best, church-state separation violations don't take days off. We're still watching it happen. I need to say something about it. I got a ton of pushback from people about my negativity towards the religiosity of the event, and I think of it a lot like I do a city council invocation, right? If you're gonna do it, it needs to be all inclusive, or we don't do it. And so when when all of that was happening, and I said, okay, the Christian invocation is done. Now we do the imam and the rabbi, right? You know, like,
given that there were, I think, 3 of them, that would have been nice to see, or a secular invocation.
Right. And then there was also a tone of that it's a ceremonial thing, right? That it's not. This isn't a legislative issue. This isn't we're passing laws or making rules for our departments. Like, this is just a ceremony. Big deal, Sarah. But it's not. and the fact that y'all are used to it, that's it. Like, it doesn't ring that way to you because that's just how it's always been, and that's how everything is, and it just comes across as no big deal because that's how it's always been. But when you're on the other side of that, imagine how it felt to be a Muslim American and hearing this message of unity, but not being included in that message of unity.
That's exactly what I was going to raise, and it reminded me. Early on in the Trump administration, I went to an Indivisible event on the Mall here in DC, and I say here in DC. I'm across the river, but it doesn't matter. I went to an Indivisible event, and they open it essentially with, now let's all bow our heads in prayer, and afterward, I didn't. I just kind of looked around and made a note of, silent nod to all the other people who were also not bowing their heads in silent prayer, and made a point afterward of sneaking around to one of the organizers to say, hey, the group's called Indivisible. And the very first thing you did was divide us along religious versus non-religious lines. You might want to think about that in the future.
Yeah.
And then, we get to this inauguration, and he's talking about unity. And not only did he not mention by name the non-religious community, which, by the way, voted overwhelmingly for him in the election, but much of the language was as if we didn't exist at all. Our faith is what unites us, or let us all bow our heads in silent prayer, or something, things like that. That not only didn't acknowledge us explicitly, but pretended that everyone in the country is of some unifying faith that simply isn't. I mean, even among the Christian community, there's there's such vast divisions between a Christian in Boston and a Christian in Huntsville, Alabama. So it was incredibly jarring, and also, frankly, incredibly disappointing, and worth calling out in the moment, because if you wait like they want you to for a few days or however long, I don't know what is the appropriate waiting period for mentioning, oh, by the way, you excluded us in the inauguration. But calling it out in the moment raises people's awareness then in the moment. Right. And you're not asking them to remember this event that lasted for 4 hours, 3 weeks ago. You have to raise it there in the moment. It strikes me as the equivalent to, well, we've just had a shooting. Now is not the time to talk about gun control. No, that is the time to talk about gun control. This is the time to talk about church-state violations because you're in the middle of one. And no, I completely disagree with the people who were criticizing you on your feed.
Yeah, exactly. Devin's back.
Yay!
Sweet baby Jesus. My God. The internet was trying to eat me. I made it back.
Yay.
We're glad you...
I'm here. Now my camera's all off. Oh my God. This took me hours to do. Oh my God. Okay.
That's all right. If you're responsible for freezing the program,
I'm so sorry.
It's okay. I'm going to blame it on you anyway.
I take blame. I don't care. Whatever.
So what you missed there was just general discussion about the inauguration. Did you watch? Did you have strong feelings about the tone?
I watched. I don't know why. I just thought it started at noon. And so I got on at 10 till, and they already had started like the Biden, the Biden swearing in on the Cheesecake Factory menu, the Necronomicon, whatever it was.
So absurd.
It was so big. Wow. They'd already started that, and I was listening at some point in the background. I heard the prayer, and I was like, "There's a lot of God in this," and I don't. It was a little jarring here, yeah. But I didn't pay that much to pay that much attention to the inauguration because it just happened, and that's all I care about.
Yeah,
it's done.
That's true.
Yeah,
it got the job done.
We have a new president.
How about Amanda Gorman though? Holy cow, that was amazing. That was amazing.
I wasn't sure about her hand gesticulations and motions and whatnot, but it grew on me by the end of it. I enjoyed her like climbing the hill and those kinds of things. But at first I wasn't sure how that was going to play. I didn't know if she was going for a quasi ASL thing or something.
Right. Oh, and that was cool too. Like as much as I hate the pledge and all of that patriotic masturbation stuff, that was awesome. Like to have that done in sign by the person who was presenting it. That was really great. All right. So let's get into the meat of the matter here. So there's a couple of lawsuits that were just filed. And I think they're prime examples of what we've been seeing a lot lately, which is a license to discriminate cloaked as religious exemption. So start with the Department of Education regulation about university student groups. What's this one all about?
Sure. So that one, I should mention up front, we are co-counsel in that case with the with Americans United for the Separation of Church and State. They are their lead counsel on it because I have plenty on my plate already. But essentially, back in February of last year, the Department of Education proposed a rule that would require public schools, public colleges and universities specifically, to treat religious student groups the same as all other student groups, even if they don't comply with the school's either all-comers or non-discrimination rules regarding student groups in their membership and leadership. To give a little background here, so there are a lot of moving parts. That was a proposed rule back in February, and the way that federal regulations work, you have to introduce the agency has to create what's called a notice of proposed rulemaking, and then the public has an opportunity to comment on the proposed rule. And during that comment period, about 17,000 comments were submitted. And then the agency has to take those comments and respond to them in the final rule, and either change the proposed rule accordingly or not as they determine. What happened here is in September 23rd, I believe, the Department of Education introduced its final rule, which was substantively identical to the proposed form. And the rule then went into effect on November 23rd. What this means practically is that students at colleges and universities all across the country, particularly public colleges, who pay student activity fees. These are usually mandatory fees that students have to pay, that then the student government or some committee or whatnot allocates to student groups to support their activities. They want to bring in a speaker, they want to have a pizza party, or any number of different things that are financially supported by those fees. But those fees are usually only allocated to the terminology shifts around from school to school, of course, but we're referring to them as recognized student groups. And these are student groups that get the benefit of both those fees and use of school facilities, use of the school logo in their promotional materials, those kinds of things. And very often, one of the requirements to be a recognized student group is to not discriminate in your membership and leadership. So students at these schools who have paid these mandatory fees will now see those fees in part provided to religious student groups that are entitled to discriminate against the student who's providing the mandatory fee very often. If you're an atheist or an LGBT student, or potentially a member of a racial minority, all these religious student groups and only religious student groups will be exempt from the requirement that the group not discriminate against any of the students. And that's problematic on a number of levels. It appears to be a fairly straightforward Establishment Clause violation. It's also a free speech violation, because these programs that the schools put together have been determined by the courts to be limited public forums or designated public forums. And what that means is that the school cannot engage in what's called viewpoint discrimination. They can't pick and choose and subject to favorable or unfavorable terms student groups based on their viewpoint. And yet the Department of Education is explicitly requiring them to lower the barriers to religious student groups and make participation in this limited public forum easier for religious student groups, and access to these funds easier for religious student groups purely based on their viewpoint. In addition to all of that, in addition to the constitutional issues it raises, the really clear-cut problem with this is that the Department of Education has no authority to do any of this. I don't want to get too lost in the administrative law weeds here, but the way that federal agencies work is they are enforcing laws and exercising authority that has been delegated to them by either Congress or the president. And the only time the president can delegate authority to them is when that authority was given to him by either the Constitution or Congress. Here, none of that is true. Congress has expressly given the authority to enforce, to protect against and investigate religious discrimination to the Department of Justice. If it's employment, they've delegated that to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And the Department of Education has acknowledged for years that they do not have any authority to act in this area. So by putting this rule in place, they have gone beyond their authority, and the legal term is ultra vires. And so we hope that pretty quickly we can get the court to invalidate that portion of the rule.
I don't want to maybe jump and just put the cart in front of the horse, but I did have a thought, just trying to sort of understand how all of these pieces flow together.
Sure.
So these are lawsuits filed against the now former Trump administration's Department of Education.
Well, the Department of Education and the and the Secretary of Education.
Yes.
Or I guess, so it was going to be Betsy DeVos. She abruptly resigned.
Right.
It's now Mark Zayas. I never have quite learned his last name because he was an acting guy for like 4 days.
Right. Right. Well, so that was my question, I guess, is in cases like this, does the new administration and their folks become accountable, or is it the specific individuals who were acting in those roles?
It continues onto the new administration's Department of Education and Secretary.
So short of a quick legal ruling, I mean, could we get the Biden administration to reverse some policies and remove the issue that's at place, and then it becomes moot? Is that another solution? Yeah.
That is absolutely a possibility. The Biden administration could tomorrow introduce its own notice of proposed rulemaking, undoing exactly what we're trying to get rid of.
Right.
Now, it would then have to go through that same process where they provide 60 days. They're supposed to provide 60 days for the public to comment on the notice of proposed rulemaking, and then they have to take some time to respond to those comments. They announce the final rule, like I said, and then it goes into effect another 60 days after the final rule. The Department of Education didn't do that last year. They only provided 30 days for comments for no particular reason, because of course they did. But that could definitely happen. And I mean, as we saw last year, where the notice was published in January, February, and then the final rule goes into effect in November. I mean, that's a good 9-10 months. Before the change would go into effect. We're hoping to get actually a quicker resolution from the court than that. We'll see how it plays out.
So with this notice of proposed rule, whatever it's called, making period.
Before I forget, the Biden administration could also decide not to fight us on this, in which case things would go considerably faster.
Right.
So if you're listening, President Biden.
I'm sure he is.
Of course.
He absolutely is.
Yeah. Big fan of the show.
Acknowledging our existence and that we deserve equality and dignity and that kind of thing.
Yes.
Sorry, nice. Devin, go ahead.
It's all good. So during that period for public comment, you said there were 17,000 comments. Let's pretend 16,000 of those were against this stupid rule. Would that matter? Is there any bearing on that whatsoever?
So the comments, they are obligated to respond to each comment.
With a form letter.
Like if you get 10, let's say of those 17,000, 3,000 of them all addressed one specific point and made one particular argument, then you can respond to those comments and the arguments that they raised collectively. You don't have to send a form letter in response to each comment or anything like that. I'm given how many comments these things usually get, you essentially couldn't run government that way. But they are required to respond, and they're also one of the things that the agency has to do under what's called the Administrative Procedure Act is not engage in rulemaking that is arbitrary or capricious. So if comments raise legitimate issues and in responding, they just sort of shrug it off and go, we don't care, or some, more diplomatic wording for we don't care, then you very well may have a claim to make that their rule is arbitrary and capricious because they didn't consider the points that were raised in the comment. And that is actually among the arguments that we make in our complaint, is that they did not consider, despite the fact that it was raised in a number of comments, the impact that this rule change would have on students who are members of minority groups that are, historically subject to discrimination.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Oh, this is fun. So I am actually the faculty advisor for the SSA here at unnamed university here in Tallahassee. My what I'm saying is not is not representative of my employer, everyone. So we had a bit of an issue at at this university this past year. I'm going to say it doesn't matter. Where the president of the Student Government Association was on a message board for one of these RSOs, these registered student organizations. Like it was like for the Catholic Student Union, I believe. And he said some very transphobic comments, anti-Black Lives Matter comments. And this got leaked out, and he was kicked out of the presidency of the student government here. And he sued with the help of the Alliance Defending Freedom. Mm-hmm. I think you're very familiar with them.
I'm aware of this case.
But he was eventually put back into office and stated him with the left. I think
we might be losing.
I think it's with like, oh no.
Oh,
damn it!
No,
Am I back?
There you go. Take another run at that.
Okay. Oh God, I'm ruining the show. Okay, so they reinstated him because he sued, and they reinstated him with a month left of his term, even though there was he was not wanted. So I guess this is a serious concern, I think, in general for universities and colleges across the U.S. How do we fight this? Do you think this rule had any play in what happened with the case here?
No, because the rule had not gone into effect when any of that happened, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
It was all, if I remember right, his term was due to expire in October, and he was reinstated.
December, I think.
September? Sorry?
I think it was December.
Oh. Okay.
Or late November. So I guess it wouldn't have lined up.
Yeah, and if I remember right, the issue there was with the student government itself, that the student senate was alleged to have, not removed him in a way that honored his right to free speech.
Okay.
So no, they are related in as much as schools cannot engage in viewpoint discrimination, but this rule does not, as far as I'm aware, have any impact on that situation.
Gotcha. I think he was also paid a minimum wage salary as well, so there was an employment issue maybe as well, but it's still crazy. And so we're coming up on our legislative session on March 2nd, and there's been I don't know if you heard our esteemed governor giving a speech in Texas where his legislative priority is free speech, especially on social media and college campuses. So we have a lot of bills coming through this year that are fighting the suppression of conservative speech, and there should be evaluations of this and so on and so forth. So how do you think that would jive with the current ruling, or as it stands?
How do I think that the new bills would jive with the situation that you were just describing?
Kind of with all the, I guess, considering if the way that you want it, I guess, so that we want it, where there wouldn't be, you can't give funding to the RSOs that have discriminatory policies. Could these state level laws that are that are pro, quote unquote, pro free speech and want everyone to, be able to say whatever they want without consequences, how do you think that would jive?
So it's tough to say without looking at the text of a bill. I can see bill that provides mechanisms for reporting and investigating potential free speech violations, things like that. But I can, and that would be fine.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, whether or not it's a good use of the government's time and energy is an open question. But at the same time, if you are, if what the bill is doing is giving greater protection to a certain viewpoint or political perspective or anything like that, then you're running afoul of the same issue where the government cannot favor or disfavor speech based on its viewpoint. You can the government can regulate the time, place, and manner of speech, and it can regulate depending on in a limited public forum or a designated public forum, it can regulate the matters on which speech is being, if it can regulate speech in as much as it might limit it to speech that is related to the function of the forum. So if you have I have Parks and Rec in my head. If you're having a town forum with the head of the Parks and Rec department, they may say to someone who's talking about paving a highway, sorry, that's not germane to what we're talking about here. That's not viewpoint discrimination. That's just not the purpose of the forum. So I can see bills, in this area being fine, though you would essentially be reiterating the First Amendment. And I can easily see them being incredibly flawed. So
like I just think the example would be you have a club that they just say, we hate gays, we hate them, and we don't want them in our group. We're still receiving funding. That's based on like Florida, like assuming the bill would pass, we have the right to this free speech based on our we have a conservative viewpoint. We don't want it to be suppressed. I don't know. I feel like we're going down a rabbit hole. Maybe.
And where now you might be able to play that's our sincerely held religious belief card and get away with it. Now they're trying to sort of paper that up even farther to say conservative viewpoint.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, that would not really fly in a constitutional context because all speech is protected. Conservative speech does not give you more protection than liberal, progressive.
You don't live in Florida, Jeff. So
Missouri, rural Maryland, and Texas. So
oh my.
And Salt Lake City. So.
Let's switch then into the second case. And now this one was filed against the Trump-led Departments of Health and Human Services, Agriculture, Housing and Urban Development, Veterans Affairs, Education, Homeland Security, Justice, and Labor. All for...
Did you get Veterans Affairs? I may have skipped over.
Yes.
Okay.
All for rollbacks of legitimate religious freedom protections. And so I understand this to be about like taxpayer-funded services that are provided by faith-based organizations, right? And I'm thinking of things like food pantries, homeless shelters, that sort of thing.
Yes.
Break that one down for us.
Sure. And I'll note in this instance that we are a plaintiff in this case. We are not part of the legal team, though, we're involved in the conversations, but I am not a lawyer drafting documents in this case. So, yes, this concerns regulations of programs that receive either direct federal funding or what's called indirect federal funding. That basically is voucher programs. And to provide a little backstory, the Obama administration in 2016 introduced a raft of rules in these same agencies and a couple of others that essentially said faith-based organizations have the same ability to engage or to receive federal funds and provide the social services that those funds are intended to provide. But because you are religious entities, you have to be sure that a number of things. You have to be sure that any religious activity, like you're not holding worship services where the food bank is at the same time that people are there to, benefit from the food bank that's federally funded.
I got to interrupt you, Jeff, because
Sure.
this one, this really hits home for us because we started in the wake of COVID, we started a what I call the novel food pantry response to the novel coronavirus, and that is, I don't want y'all coming to our house to pick up food, our food pantry house to pick up food. So we're going to deliver it to you, and we're focusing on people who cannot get to food, traditional food banks for whatever reasons.
Sure.
And in that, we learned that there are quite a few organizations here in the county that are absolutely exchanging prayers and sermons for food, and largely because people just don't know any better. So they just go along with it because I'm hungry and I need the food. So that's definitely a thing that we have seen here of,
Yeah, I want to draw a distinction just real quickly that we're only talking about requirements for programs that do receive
government funding. Right.
Now, if it's just a church decides to put up a food bank,
yep,
and they don't take any money from the state or the federal government, these rules don't impact state programs directly. That's opening up a can of worms I don't want to get into in the fairly short amount of time that we have. But it's entirely possible that those programs don't receive any federal funds,
right,
and so are entirely entitled to do that. That actually raises one of the issues that we raise in the complaint, which is it is very difficult to know whether or not food bank, down the corner food bank is receiving federal funds.
Right.
Now, something that the 2016 rules instituted was a requirement that that religious service providers receiving federal funds have to provide notice to beneficiaries of the program, so the people receiving food in this example, that they have various rights. They are not required to engage or to engage in religious activity that the organization happens to be putting on. They can't be discriminated against for their religion or anything else.
Right.
Well, not anything else, but the protected classes.
Yep.
And if someone is uncomfortable receiving the service from the religious service provider, the provider has to refer them to a alternate service provider that's providing the same service.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what that does, that does a huge number of things, but one thing it does right away is let someone like me or someone who's the beneficiary of the program, if they are aware of these rules, it lets them know right away this food bank is receiving federal funding because this is a requirement of receiving federal funding. Whereas so this gets to what this lawsuit is about, because
right,
the Trump administration removed many of those restrictions. Faith-based service providers now do not have to, and this is, when I say now, I mean as of the day before the inauguration, do not have to provide that notice. They don't have to refer you to an alternate entity. That makes things very difficult for both recipients who may not feel comfortable going to a church to get their food. They may not feel comfortable they may not feel comfortable sitting out that prayer before before a meal at a homeless shelter or something along those lines. And without that notice, they don't know that they can and are entitled to sit out religious practices, that they are not supposed to be subjected to religious exercises,
right,
in order to get the benefit of these federally funded programs. It also makes it very difficult, like I said, for the people like me who are trying to protect the rights of particularly the non-religious community, but frankly, minority religious communities and Christians as well, that it suddenly becomes very difficult for us to know if someone comes to me and says, like you did, bunch of service providers in my county, bunch of food banks in my county, require me to, say grace before a meal or something like that. I now have to do a lot of research to find out, is there even federal money involved to know whether or not a violation has happened. And I won't get into the details, but there's a website provided by the federal government that lists all the various grant recipients and things like that. It doesn't. There are a lot of them. It's not the most useful database, and also there are a lot of indirect. And I need to be careful with my terminology here, because there's plenty of state programs that are also essentially a way of passing federal funds to the end service providers.
Right.
And that website does not account for those in any way. So it can be incredibly challenging and incredibly work intensive to get to the bottom of whether or not a violation has actually occurred. And that's for someone in my position where I have a pretty good idea what I'm talking about and what I'm doing and what people's rights are. The person who is, impoverished, needs social services. Not that everyone who needs social services is impoverished. I didn't send that signal, but generally, people who need social services are less likely to be as aware of what their rights are than someone in my position. So if it requires, half a day of time for me to figure out whether or not something's federally funded, they're not going to have any idea.
Sure. Right. Or have access to the resources or know what those resources are for them to go find out those answers, even if they know that that's an issue that they can research.
Right.
There's just so many layers to it. Yeah.
Whereas that food bank on the corner may know all the other food banks and which ones are religious and which ones aren't religious and all of that kind of thing. Suddenly now they aren't required to refer someone to an alternate program. Now it's on that person or on me to research all the food banks in your county and find out which ones are religious, which ones aren't, which ones impose various requirements, which ones don't. And it just multiplies the amount of effort it takes for people to protect and defend their rights. And it's incredibly problematic. And again, something that a number of commenters raised in the rulemaking process that the agencies did not address in any sort of any way that's close to being sufficient. So once again, we're arguing that these are arbitrary and capricious because they did not take these issues into account that were specifically raised.
This is a little random, but the alternate providers, do they have to have the same basic services, like the same benefits as the religious ones, if they're going to be advertised?
The referral requirement requires that whoever they're referring to provides essentially the same service.
Okay.
I don't have the language in front of me, but you're referring someone to another entity that will provide the same benefit to the beneficiary.
Okay. Yeah.
So would it? Okay. So if what would the outcome be here? Is so the Obama administration put in all of these protections, which the Trump administration then took away. At the outcome of this, case, or, I mean, again, they can decide to, reinstate whatever policies they want to, new policies, and get rid of this one. Would that simply return it to a state where all of those policies are in effect again?
So that's an excellent question. There are actually, because of the timing here, there are a couple of extra mechanisms that the Biden administration could use to essentially invalidate the rule without, how far into the weeds do I want to get?
Go far.
So, I mentioned with regard to the other lawsuit that the Biden administration could absolutely propose a new rule,
right,
and go through the notice and comment period and release a final rule sometime later this year. That either, and depending on the rule, could reestablish the rule as it existed in 2016. It could, excise those portions and replace them with better language or something like that. They could do any number of things in a new rule, presuming that they do it, properly and legally, something the Trump administration never managed to accomplish. But when it comes to our two lawsuits here, the court, if it just invalidated those portions of the rules, then in this instance, I believe that we would just revert, because you're excising the changes that the old rule made, that essentially the provisions would return to what they were under the 2016 rules. Right. Now, again, I don't have the rule language in front of me, and I don't have the rule language from 2016 in front of me. So don't quote me on that when in a year there's some weird thing that turns out but so through our lawsuit, I'm almost positive that it would essentially revert to the 2016 rules, as to the provisions that are invalidated. The other option is what's called the Congressional Review Act. Now, because the Democrats control the Senate, this is something that is more in play than it would have been had Warnock and Ossoff not won in Georgia, where there is a look-back period, and Congress can essentially put a pause on regulations that went into effect within a window, and you'll forgive me, this is not my area of expertise, so I'm not going to say what that window is. But Congress can look back a certain number of days into the prior congressional term, essentially, and put a pause on regulations that were instituted during that period. I hope I'm not butchering this, because, again, I am speaking about something that is not my area of expertise. And if I'm wrong, I'm certain I'll get a message from Allison when she eventually watches this. Don't talk about the Congressional Review Act.
Be nice, Allison.
Thank you, Devin. So there are a number of different options in this lawsuit, strictly because of the timing, that make it a little difficult to say exactly how things will play out. But it could very well simply revert to, on these points, to what the rule was in 2016.
Right.
I mean, obviously this rule just came into effect 4 days ago or something, but do you expect a lot of people to come, or a lot of religious or agencies to come out and just be like, hey, we're doing this, so screw you, like just kind of out themselves? Because I feel like that's kind of something we've seen from the evangelicals in the past 4 years, and I wonder how ballsy they're going to get.
Yeah, I don't I'm tempted to say that there are going to be a mix of organizations. There are plenty of religious social services providers that are above board, do things the right way, regardless of whether or not the government is telling them they have to.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. I think they all should do that. But I am certain, will be some who, decide we're gonna take these federal funds and yeah, you do have to join us in mass before you have your lunch, or we're going to give you these this food from the food bank so long as you sit down and pray with me. I have no doubt that that's going to happen. I don't know how widespread it's going to be.
It makes me wonder too if I don't know what the reporting and record keeping mechanisms were under the 2016 rules. But there's probably some bucket of organizations that flouted that when it went into effect too, and said, we're not going to notify people that this is what their rights are. Screw you. We're just going to do our thing, and probably got away with it.
Yeah, because when you don't tell people what their rights are, shockingly, they don't know what their rights are.
Right.
And in fact, the only thing that if I remember correctly, the 2016 rules required that there be reports made to the agencies granting the money when there was essentially when an agency refused to refer someone to another service provider. So they didn't report every time they did successfully refer somebody. But at the same time, the new rules change who's doing the reporting and under what circumstances.
Here's what's crazy about all of this, man. This is what's crazy. Just fucking help people. Just help people. If we would all do this, the whole world would be a better place. But just help people, man.
That's the whole shame of it, is the churches have the money, the organization just built into them, and they have the capabilities to do this. And that's why, but I hate the stipulations that they put on this. And that's why I appreciate what Sarah's doing with the atheist group in Polk County. And it's ecumenical. I don't think it doesn't matter who joins you, right?
Nope.
Right. Cool. That's how it should be.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the food bank that we set up, we set this up specifically because we knew that there were organizations out there doing this kind of stuff. And we, the founders, all right, there's several organizations that came together. It's us, it's the Planned Parenthood, it's the Unitarian Universalist Congregation. We call ourselves the little family of outcasts. We're the organizations that everybody else is oh God, they're here, at the party or whatever. They don't want to work with us. Screw you. Then we'll all work together, and we're doing it the right way. We're not. I don't need your last 7 years tax returns to know that you're hungry and you need food. Are you hungry and need food? Here's some food. This is easy, guys. This is easy.
Yeah.
Picturing a weird island of misfit charities.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right.
Does this ruling apply to AA? Because some courts will mandatory there's someone goes through court and they have to go to AA as part of their treatment. Do they have?
It's anonymous. Sorry.
Sorry. No, American Atheists. They have to go to American Atheists as part of their treatment. Sorry.
Yes, if there is a substance abuse health provider that receives federal funding, it absolutely applies to them. Yeah,
because there's been several cases in the past few years where they have not. Courts won't allow people to go to anywhere but AA, right?
Yeah, if a court should never order someone to go to AA to the exclusion exclusion of any other substance abuse treatment, program. That should not happen. And if that happens, I would like to hear about it. And frankly, if a social services provider is engaging in conduct that is enforcing their religion on beneficiaries, the people who are there to receive services funded by the federal government,
Yep.
I want to hear about that too. And again, I'll mention atheist.org/report a violation.
Yeah. And if a court mandates that they go to an American Atheist convention, I'm sure we'd like to hear about that as well. They will have a good time.
You would have absolutely, you'd have a good time, but I will be consistent and say a court should not order someone to go to an American Atheist convention.
You will be an alcoholic.
By the time we're done with you, you will have
a problem. Yeah, problems.
So let me loop back to the beginning then. When I asked about the Biden administration could just make these changes, implement new rules, and it makes the cases moot. Mm-hmm. Is there though? Is there any specific value, whether precedential or some other value, in these cases going forward and being resolved that way?
There certainly is. Yes, there is value in that. I think it's more valuable to get a quick resolution here, however that comes about.
Yes.
And I will say, because I don't anticipate, and again, famous last words, but because I don't anticipate if the court comes down our way on either of these for the Biden administration to, appeal it up to the Supreme Court,
right.
Or even to the appellate court, there really is not likely. There's some interesting grammar there. It's unlikely that there would be significant precedent coming out of either of these cases. That doesn't mean that there couldn't be, just that given the political attitudes of the Biden administration with regard to Trump administration agency rules, I don't think it's going to happen.
Right.
So again, any possibility of binding precedent is far outweighed by the benefit to the public of just getting this resolved quickly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Devin, any further questions? Your witness.
What's coming down the pike?
Yeah.
Can you talk about it?
So I can talk about we have currently going on. Right now we have two. Sorry. So prior to the 19th, we had two cases in active litigation. One is before the Fifth Circuit, and we are waiting for either a decision from the Fifth Circuit or for them to set a date for oral argument. That involves a student who was sitting for the Pledge of Allegiance throughout much of high school and received some harassment from students and faculty as a result.
Public school?
Yeah, public school. And then we are suing a state senator in Arkansas for blocking atheist constituents on his official government social media accounts.
Oh, Jason Rapert.
Stanley.
Yeah.
Good old Stanley. We just had a required conference. I will not get into the rules of civil procedure, but we had to have a phone call among all the attorneys to iron out some details, and that is done. And so we will be starting the process of discovery, which is where both sides ask for and provide the materials they plan to use in support of either their claims in our case or their defenses in his case. So that's going to be a probably long and drawn out process. It usually is. So you won't hear much from that case probably until at least August or September. Yeah. Well, it's a lot of, we need documents X, Y, and Z. We receive a case of documents that then we have to go through. Actually, now it's PDFs and things like that, but still, the visual is effective because that's how many documents you get. We have a couple of things in percolating, let's say, that I will not get into the details of, because again, those are kind of percolating. But
is it about election fraud?
No. No. Turns out there really isn't election fraud.
What?
No, I saw one news story about one person.
I was going to say,
yeah,
there isn't really voter fraud. That is not a problem that we have in this country. And by voter fraud, I mean people voting when they shouldn't, or people voting for other people, or people voting twice, people voting when we shouldn't. That's voting fraud, voter fraud, and that is not a problem that we really have. I think in Georgia, there were, between the general election and the special election, there were precisely 2 instances of people voting when they shouldn't. Now, what does happen, but this is not our area of expertise, and again, this is a tangent, but there is certainly election fraud in the either of the sort where an elected official calls up another official and says, change the results, please, or efforts to suppress the vote, keep people who are eligible to vote from voting, those kinds of things, that there absolutely is systematic instances of, especially after the Roberts Court invalidated some important parts of the Voting Rights Act back in 2014. So, but again, not the kind of case we would bring. I could see us when it comes to elections, and this is actually something worth talking about with your audience, is if come election time, I don't know when you guys have your next election. I know in Virginia we have off-year elections, so they're actually gearing up for assembly elections this November. But if you have a polling place that's in a church, that is permissible, but the church has to take steps to make sure that people aren't being proselytized to. They aren't sending, they shouldn't be sending messages about who to vote for anyway. But there are certain steps that religious.
I preach this to our people every 2 years. Yeah. They can't give you out goodie bags with their church logo on it. They're not supposed to have literature racks set up in the line where you're walking through. Like, there's a bunch of really, really good points, to things to keep an eye out. We vote early, one, because it's a whole lot more convenient, and 2, because I don't have to go to the church. But our polling place, our assigned polling place, is indeed in a church. But the early polling place is the library, and there's never anybody there.
And I do want to mention it. So when it comes to elections, if where you voted in November had those kinds of problems where they were, out there, church staff are talking to people waiting in line, that kind of thing, let us know now, because if, let's say your next election is the 2022, general election that pretty much everybody will have, you generally won't know what a particular polling place is going to do until the day of the election, when you're there voting. And by that time, it's too late for us to do anything to stop it, because the election is happening and will have happened.
You cast your vote, you walk out, you've lost standing.
Exactly. So it's better if we know now where places have had problems and start communicating with county officials ahead of time to say, listen, we received reports of this in the prior election. These need to be addressed. And if come October, they are not instituting changes or anything, then we could take some action prior to the election, using past practice as evidence to support claims of standing. So it's important to report those kinds of things before the day of, because if it's the day of, it's too late.
So if like a church polling place had a sign in front that said, vote for the guy that doesn't kill the babies, that's something we should report to you, right?
Something you should report to me.
Okay. Done.
Yes.
And hey, let's put a pin in that. And when we have election season roll back around, every 2 years, I'm good dragging this topic back out and having this conversation again for a whole new audience, because a lot of people just don't know.
Yeah, and I'm happy to have those conversations.
Yep. One of the things that when I very first started getting into this, that I thought was frustrating is the remedy of, first, we shouldn't be voting in churches. Like, really, we shouldn't. I understand why we do. There's a lot of people that have to vote and not a lot of public spaces to do it in. So if all of your schools are being utilized, that can be. And if, of course, we have, if we make Election Day a holiday and then have the schools closed, boy, that would free up a lot of space, wouldn't it? But the resolution really is, if you were voting in a church and you don't like it, you really need to go do the legwork and figure out, is there another space in this area, this voting district? But then it also has to comply with ADA laws, and like there's all of these things that the requiremements that it has to meet. It's just really hard to turn that around, but it's worth having a conversation with your supervisor of elections that, hey, this is something that's there is a constituency out here that is frustrated by this, and that we're willing to be part of a solution of whatever that looks like.
Yeah. I will say that we vote in a Catholic church, and they actually do a pretty good job, except that there's a god-awful wooden statue of Jesus outside that looks like Greg Allman. If we can get something done about that would be great. It's an eyesore.
Just covered up with a tarp for the day. Oh man.
Yeah, and that's the kind of thing that should be addressed, but won't be.
Right.
Yeah. It's outside in the parking lot.
Yeah.
I mean, my polling place has often been in churches, and thankfully the ones I've had to vote in have been very good about doing things the right way.
Good.
But they all have that smell. Like all churches have that smell. I don't know what it is.
And yes, they do.
That is not. That is not something that you should file a complaint at atheists.org/ Yeah, right.
Well, you haven't seen the emails I send to Jeff, so.
Maybe we should publish some of those. What do you think?
No.
No.
Yes.
No. All right. Well, let's, Jeff, I'll give you the final word, and if you want to tell people how to find and follow you and the work that you do in American Atheists and all of those things.
Yeah, if like I've said a couple of times, if you are going about your day and encounter a potential violation of the separation between religion and government, by all means, report that to us at our website, atheist.org/report-a-violation. Let's see, you can find us at oh, now I'm blanking on our Twitter account. At Atheists. Crap.
I forget it too. It's fine.
See, you put me on the spot. I didn't have things prepared.
American Atheists.
You can reach me at Blackwell ESQ. For what that's worth. And you can reach American Atheists at American Atheist. No S on the end.
Singular.
Yeah. I knew there was.
Jeff's the only sober one here.
Yes, because I've got my tea. I'm not going to.
I have only had one glass.
I do my job.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Good times. Good times.
All right. Well, Jeff, thanks for chatting with us, and keep us updated as things move forward, and come back anytime. This is great. There's so many more things we can talk about.
There are so many more things we could talk about. Evan, you and I can have multiple conversations offline as well if you choose.
Okay.
Girl Scout cookies, by the way.
Yes, please order.
I did.
Oh,
They are on their way. I don't know how long it'll take them to get to me.
they're super fast shipping.
That's good, because I have been out of Thin Mints for quite some time.
Man, we're in our last Samoas right now, so it's real bad situation here.
Shame.
I tried to buy some knockoff Thin Mints at like Target the other day, and got them home and opened went to open the box and saw they were gluten free.
Oh.
And was severely disappointed.
There's some good gluten-free options out there.
No, there absolutely are. These were not.
Oh, sorry.
I should have just gotten some grasshoppers and been done with it. But
Unpopular opinion. I don't like Thin Mints. Sorry, everybody.
I could do without Thin Mints.
Not a big fan.
I got Thin Mints, samosas, and Samoas and samosas.
You know what?
Yeah.
Drink.
Yeah. Tea. Okay.
Tagalongs.
Yeah, there you go.
These are good.
All right. Well, Jeff, appreciate you so much. You have a good night, and we'll chat with you again soon.
Thank you, guys. This was so much fun.
Absolutely.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. Jeffrey Blackwell.
He's so crazy.
Esquire. Is that how I'm supposed to say it? Esquire.
That's how.
Litigation Counsel with American Atheists. So much appreciate him so much for being on. Devin, anything new going on with you? What's happening? What's new? Do you have anything you want to share or plug?
I would keep an eye on social media in the next week and a half. There's something that's going to happen here in Florida that I think is going to be very exciting and big.
Ooh.
In the repro world.
Ooh.
So that'll be fun. I don't know if I can say anything.
Don't say anything.
I won't.
Yeah, we'll talk about it when it happens.
I'm so excited.
How about that? Okay. We have we're starting up some of our community service stuff again, where we've been doing the food insecurity and homelessness outreach stuff that we've been doing, but we're starting up our roadway cleanups again this week. So that's a thing that and let me tell you, we drove around the county, and y'all need to stop throwing your trash out the car. I just don't understand these people. I don't get it. People are awful.
Yes, they are.
On Sunday, I'll be participating in a panel along with Alec and Becca, directors of the ACPC. We're going to do a panel with the Central Florida Freethought community on sort of where the Central Florida atheist scene goes after COVID. What's next for Central Florida atheists? So that'll be fun. That's gonna I think that's a Zoom call. You can find that on our meetup at meetup.com if you want to be a part of that. And then I've got I have a thing coming up. I'm gonna do the Recovering from Religion TED Talk series on February 1st. RFRX they call it. I'll be doing that. And then the week after that, I've got a Faith Leaders Forum with the Teen Pregnancy Prevention Alliance. This is the second year that I've been asked to be on that panel, and I'm the one that's there to. It's a Faith Leaders event, but I'm the one that's there to say, hey, stop telling kids, just don't do it anymore, because that doesn't work. That's basically my role.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
So anyway, that's what I have going on. If people want to find you, Devin, and Humanists of Tallahassee, where can they do that?
You could find our group at Humanist TLH on the Twitters and I guess Instagram, although I can't do Instagram. I don't take good pictures. We're also on the Faceplace as well. If you want to find me, I'm at DLGPhD on Twitter. If you want a little heads up on the event next week, you can look for, I believe, Progress Florida or the Floridians for Reproductive Freedom will have an event posted that you should take a look at. It's going to be the next Thursday, the 28th, I think. It's going to be pretty sweet. It's going to be a Zoom power hour on the fake clinics here in Florida, the fake abortion clinic,
Excellent. You have options. Yeah,
we all have options, don't we? And some of them are real shit. So, so it's going to be an interesting week in the repro world here in Florida. So I'm pretty stoked about it.
Yeah, a lot going on. All right. Well, thank you as always, Devin, for
no problem.
being a fantastic co-host. You are always fabulous. And that's and that's going to do it for this week. Freethought in Florida is available on YouTube, Facebook, all the popular podcast players. You can find all the links to subscribe at polkatheists.org. Please do like, subscribe, and share out the episodes and help us grow a bigger audience. Of course, you can find out all about the atheist community of Polk County and make a donation at polkatheists.org or follow at Polk Atheists on all the social media. And of course, remember the 3 most important things. Don't touch anything. You don't remember these? Don't touch anything. Wash your hands.
Oh, yes.
And wear your mask. All right, everybody, be safe. We'll see you on the next Freethought in Florida.